All characters and events in this story are fictional and created purely for entertainment purposes. My cousin Chu-na was obsessed with foreigners. In her eyes, foreign bloodlines were somehow superior, and mixed-race children were destined to be beautiful and intelligent. Because of that belief, she became determined to have a mixed-race child at any cost. She abandoned the boyfriend who had loved her devotedly for 6 years and planned to take her bride price money abroad for IVF treatment. Back then, I tried to persuade her otherwise. I told her that not every mixed-race child would grow up beautiful or gifted. Many children were perfectly ordinary, and in some cases, genetic recombination could even result in severe inherited disorders. After listening to my advice, Chu-na eventually gave up on the idea. Later, she married Lin Trak and had a child with him instead. But the baby was completely ordinary, just another grain of sand among billions of normal people. From that day forward, Chu-na hated me to the bone. She believed I had destroyed her dream of having a perfect mixed-race child. When I later suffered a sudden acute illness, she deliberately hid my phone and refused to let me call for help. I died slowly in agony and despair. And then, when I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the exact day Chu-na first announced that she wanted to have a mixed-race baby. "Look at this child on live stream. Isn't she gorgeous?" Chu-na nudged me excitedly with her elbow while scrolling through short videos on her phone. On the screen was a little girl around 5 years old. She had a sharp nose bridge, snow-white skin, a delicate V-shaped face, and deep-set brows. The exact kind of adorable mixed-race child that social media loved to glorify. "Tell me honestly," Chu-na said dreamily, "wouldn't it be amazing if I could give birth to a child like that?" My mind was still hazy from the shock of rebirth. Hearing her words again made me freeze for a moment. "What? Cat got your tongue?" She frowned impatiently. "Say something." Only then did I finally come back to my senses. I stared blankly at the familiar living room around me before hurriedly pulling out my phone. The date on the screen made my heart tremble. I had really been reborn. This time, however, I simply smiled at her. "Mixed-race children really are beautiful," I said calmly. "If you want one, then go ahead." Unexpectedly, Chu-na hesitated. "But I heard your brother-in-law mention before that mixed-race children can sometimes have birth defects. What if something goes wrong?" So she knew after all. I sneered inwardly, but showed nothing on my face. Today was originally the engagement ceremony between Chu-na and Lin Trak. Relatives had gathered early in the morning to witness the occasion. Lin Trak had arrived carrying countless gifts and was now busy helping in the kitchen. After asking me whether she should have a mixed-race child, Chu-na sat silently in the living room for a very long time. Then, suddenly, she lifted her head as though she had finally made up her mind. Under the stunned gaze of everyone present, she called Lin Trak out from the kitchen. "I need to talk to you." Lin Trak quickly wiped his wet hands on his apron and looked at her gently. "What is it? Say it quickly. I still need to help in the kitchen." He was 30 years old this year, the perfect example of a dependable Sichuan man. He didn't smoke, didn't drink, and had no bad habits. He cooked exceptionally well and always indulged Chu-na without complaint. He was an orphan with no family to rely on. In order to marry her and give her a stable life, he had worked himself to exhaustion for years. He managed to buy a house and even prepared a bride price of 500,000 yuan, an astronomical amount in their region. The house was also registered entirely under Chu-na's name. Anyone with eyes could tell how calculating she was. She had even used Lin Trak's money to make investments before finally paying off the house. Yet strangely enough, Lin Trak never complained. He willingly gave her everything. Everyone in the family could clearly see how much he loved her. After a brief silence, Chu-na finally spoke. "Lin Trak, let's break up." The smile on his face froze instantly. Panic spread visibly through his expression. "Nyana, did I do something wrong today?" She shook her head. You didn't do anything wrong. I just think Asian genes aren't good enough. I want a mixed-race child who's beautiful and intelligent. I don't want my future child to be ordinary. A mixed-race baby would start life ahead of everyone else. Again with the mixed-race obsession. The panic on Lin Trak's face slowly faded into helpless exhaustion. Nah, he sighed softly. Stop believing everything you see online. Social media only shows the prettiest examples. There are many mixed-race children who don't look attractive at all. I already told you before, don't look at things so one-sidedly. Search online for cases involving genetic disorders in mixed-race children. Some are heartbreaking. Clearly, this wasn't the first time Chu-na had brought up the topic. She frowned immediately. There you go again with that speech. You're only trying to scare me. I only see beautiful and smart mixed-race kids online. Nothing like what you're describing. Then her voice sharpened. Or maybe you just feel inferior about your own bloodline, so you deliberately insult mixed-race people to hide your insecurity? The room instantly fell silent. The relatives exchanged awkward glances. My father was about to step forward and mediate, but my mother quietly pulled him back. Lin Trak opened his mouth to explain, but Chu-na interrupted him immediately. Doctors even support having mixed-race children. Aren't they more professional than you? Her gaze shifted directly toward me. Among everyone present, I was the only doctor. The implication couldn't have been clearer. Lin Trak slowly turned to stare at me in shock. I nearly cursed out loud. What nonsense was she dragging me into? My heart skipped a beat. Had Lin Trak misunderstood me? Just as I was about to explain myself, Chu-na raised her voice again before I could speak. That's enough. I've already made my decision. We're done. Get out. The entire room fell deathly quiet. Everyone stared at Lin Trak. Under countless gazes, he lowered his head and stood there silently for a long time before finally lifting his eyes again. Nah. What about the bride price? Chu-na exploded immediately. What? You want the money back? Lin Trak, listen carefully. I spent 6 years with you. From school uniforms to adulthood. 50,000, no, even 500,000 yuan for my lost youth isn't too much. I almost laughed. Since graduation, Chu-na had never worked a single day. She had lived entirely off Lin Trak's income. Meanwhile, Lin Trak worked brutal overtime shifts at a large factory just to earn several 100,000 yuan annually. Everyone knew that salary came at the cost of his health and sleep. Yet even after returning home exhausted every night, he still cooked, cleaned, washed clothes, and treated Chu-na like a princess. We all knew because Chu-na constantly posted videos in the family group chat showing him doing housework. In every video, Lin Trak looked utterly drained. Once, my mother couldn't help but comment gently, Na, if you have time, maybe help him a little. He's already exhausted from work. Chu-na immediately mocked her in the group chat. Some people just can't stand seeing others have a good man. Jealous much? My mother nearly exploded with anger, but my father stopped her. She's still young. Don't argue with her. Years had passed since then. If anyone had truly sacrificed their youth, it was clearly Lin Trak. Yet even now, while the engagement party collapsed into chaos, Chu-na's parents remained completely silent. Not once did they stop their daughter. Lin Trak finally sighed heavily. That's not what I meant. He looked at Chu-na with exhausted eyes. I only wondered if the bride price wasn't enough. Nah, don't worry. I know I can't give you everything yet, but I'll keep working hard to give you a happy future. Enough! Chu-na cut him off impatiently. Stop pretending to be a good person to gain sympathy. Are you even a man? I've never seen anyone as weak and spineless as you. Lin Trak's face turned red with humiliation. Nyana, do you really have to be this cruel? Then get out. You're nothing like foreign men. At least they have masculinity. Lin Troc was an honest man by nature. That sentence completely crushed him. By the time Chu Na's parents came rushing out of the kitchen, Lin Troc had already left in despair. And just like that, what should have been a joyful engagement banquet ended in bitterness and silence. In my previous life, I had already researched the cost of overseas IVF treatments. The 500,000 yuan Chu Na possessed was nowhere near enough. Over the years, I had also saved up a decent amount of money myself. Afraid that she would try to borrow from me, I quickly dragged my parents away after the ruined engagement banquet ended. Sure enough, less than 2 days later, Chu Na called me. "Vivi," she said sweetly over the phone, "I asked around already. Going abroad for IVF costs a fortune. The money I have isn't enough." Her meaning could not have been more obvious. She wanted to borrow money. Naturally, there was no way I would lend her anything. Instinctively, I almost rejected her outright. But a thought suddenly flashed through my mind. The words, "I don't have money," stopped at the tip of my tongue. "How much do you need?" I asked calmly. "Not much," she replied immediately. "Just 200,000 yuan. That shouldn't be difficult for you, right?" I let out a soft sigh. "Cousin, you know I only graduated a few years ago. I'm still inexperienced, and my salary isn't very high. 200,000 isn't a small amount for me." Her tone instantly turned sharp. "What do you mean by that? So now you're pretending we're not family anymore? If it weren't for my father helping your family back then, would you even have the life you have today? Did a dog eat your conscience?" I knew she would bring that matter up again. I slowly took a sip of water before replying leisurely. "Don't rush. I never said I wouldn't lend it to you. Give me a few days to gather the money first." Only then did Chu Na calm down. "At least you still have some conscience," she muttered before hanging up. The moment the call ended, I leaned back in my chair and narrowed my eyes thoughtfully. There was no way I would actually lend her money. Giving money to Chu Na was the same as throwing it into the ocean. The reason I pretended to agree was because of something that had happened more than 20 years ago. Back then, Chu Na's family had once done my father a small favor, something so insignificant it was barely worth mentioning. Yet her entire family had spent decades using that favor to morally manipulate my parents. They ate at my mother's restaurant without ever paying. They borrowed money repeatedly without returning a single cent. And Chu Na had inherited every single bad trait from her parents perfectly. My father, unfortunately, was far too soft-hearted. If Chu Na failed to borrow money from me, she would definitely go to him instead. And once money entered her hands, it would never come back. The problem was finding a way to refuse her without damaging my parents' reputation or creating another huge family conflict. I sat at my desk, spinning a pen between my fingers, thinking for a long time without any solution. Eventually, I opened my short video account absent-mindedly and scrolled through a few clips. Then suddenly, an idea flashed through my mind. My eyes lit up immediately. I've got it. The moment the plan formed in my head, I grabbed my coat and left the house. A few days later, it was finally time for me to lend Chu Na the money. I sent her a message. I gathered the money. Meet me at the cafe near my hospital. Normally, Chu Na ignored almost everything in the family group chat. But when money was involved, her efficiency became terrifying. She arrived in less than 20 minutes. The moment she saw the bank card in my hand, her eyes sparkled greedily. "All these years loving you wasn't a waste after all," she said with a grin. "Come on, let's withdraw the money." "Don't rush," I said calmly, remaining seated. Her expression darkened immediately. "What do you mean? You already promised me. Are you going back on your word now?" Seeing her about to bring up the old family favor again, I quickly interrupted and pointed toward the coffee the waiter had just placed on the table. "Relax, cousin. I already ordered coffee for you. Let's drink first." Only then did she sit down reluctantly. She had barely lifted the cup when, "Damn it! We finally found you!" A furious roar suddenly exploded through the cafe. Chu Na jumped in shock. Her hand trembled violently, and the scorching coffee splashed all over her chest. She screamed miserably and hurriedly slapped at her soaked clothes. I glanced briefly at the reddening skin on her chest, barely suppressing the smile tugging at my lips before turning toward the group storming into the cafe. The leader was a man in his 30s named Liu Qiang. Behind him stood several rough-looking young men. Pretending to panic, I shrank backward. Liu Qiang, I already explained this to you. Your wife's death had nothing to do with me. Why do you keep coming after me?
You still trying to lie to me?
Liu Qiang roared furiously, his face flushed red. If my wife hadn't listened to your medical advice and taken those pills, how could she have died so young? The men behind him immediately spread out, vaguely surrounding both me and Chu Na. Chu Na had just recovered from the coffee burn and originally intended to argue with him, but after seeing the aggressive scene before her, she instantly shrank back into silence. One hand clutched her burned chest while the other gripped the chair tightly. She did not dare say a single word. I looked at Liu Qiang nervously. I already told you before. My advice was only based on the symptoms you described. Proper treatment required hospital examinations. You were the one who refused to bring her in. Bullshit, Liu Qiang shouted. I already consulted a lawyer. Even if you aren't fully responsible, you still carry secondary liability. His bloodshot eyes glared at me viciously. The lawyer said my wife's case could get 1.2 million yuan in compensation. At minimum, you owe me 500,000. I deliberately widened my eyes in fear. How could I possibly have that much money? Oh, so now you're scared? Liu Qiang sneered coldly. Back then you tricked me because you thought I didn't understand the law. But today I'm telling you clearly, if you don't pay up, I'll make you pay for my wife's life. He grabbed a chair violently and began walking toward me step by step. I pretended to panic completely before suddenly turning toward Chu Na like someone grasping at a final lifeline. Cousin, help me! You have 500,000 yuan, right? Lend me 300,000. Together with the 200,000 I plan to lend you, it'll be exactly enough for compensation. Chu Na instantly exploded. My money is needed for something important. Why would I lend it to you? I nearly laughed internally. So this was how she reacted when morality was used against her instead. Cousin, I pleaded desperately, we're family. You can't just watch me die. I already agreed to lend you money before. Why won't you help me now? Chu Na stood abruptly. You volunteering to lend me money was your own decision. What does that have to do with me not wanting to lend you money? As expected. Exactly the kind of shameless answer I had predicted, but the real show had only just begun. I grabbed Chu Na's sleeve before she could escape. Cousin, I'm begging you. Just help me this once. Then I deliberately lowered my voice and added, or at least return the money your family borrowed from my parents over the years. More than 200,000 yuan. Just consider this repayment, okay? Chu Na's face froze instantly. For a moment, she could not say a single word. That's completely different, she stammered at last. Anyway, my money is for something important. I can't give it to you. The moment she finished speaking, she shoved through the crowd and fled the cafe without even looking back. As soon as her figure disappeared outside, the vicious expression on Liu Qiang's face vanished completely. He winked at me and burst out laughing. So, how was my acting? The corner of my lips lifted immediately. If the Oscars don't give you an award, they're blind. Honestly, if I hadn't known beforehand that this was all staged, even I would have been terrified. That was right. Liu Qiang and the others were actors I had hired. 2 years ago, when I created medical content online, I often gave free health advice to people and helped many avoid unnecessary medical expenses. Over time, I built a decent network of acquaintances. Today's thugs were all people I had helped before. Liu Qiang simply looked the fiercest, so I chose him to lead the performance. Since everyone had helped me, I naturally invited them to dinner afterward as thanks. I sent them the address of a nearby restaurant and told them to head there first. After they left, a small figure finally peeked out from behind a corner nearby. It was my younger cousin from my father's side, a 13-year-old girl who had come to the hospital for a checkup today. And she was precisely the reason I arranged to meet Chu-na here. A perfect performance needed witnesses. Only then would the story spread properly. Soon, everyone would hear that I was caught in serious legal trouble. My parents, worried about helping me solve the problem, naturally wouldn't lend Chu-na any money. Everything would become perfectly logical. Honestly, if not for my mother's restaurant business, I wouldn't have needed to go through so much effort. The easiest solution would have been to cut ties with Chu-na's entire family completely. But reality wasn't that simple. My father had a stable government job with a comfortable income of around 20,000 yuan per month. My mother ran a small restaurant. The food itself was ordinary. The reason the restaurant survived so well was mostly because of my mother's reputation. She was warm-hearted, generous, and treated everyone kindly. Many relatives and acquaintances supported her business, bringing friends and introducing new customers. In a small town like ours, those connections accounted for nearly half the restaurant's income. Unfortunately, my parents were both far too kind-hearted. More than 20 years ago, Chu-na's family had indeed helped my father once. Although it was nothing more than a tiny favor, they exaggerated it endlessly until it sounded like they had saved our entire family from ruin. Over the years, many relatives gradually accepted that version of the story as truth. That was why I had no choice but to resort to such a troublesome plan. After all, even bad people prefer dealing with good people. If the world became filled entirely with selfish, shameless individuals, then even the bad ones would struggle to take advantage of others anymore. That was why people unconsciously liked my mother and supported her restaurant. Among dozens of restaurants with similar prices and flavors, character mattered. So today's performance was actually the cleanest solution possible. First, I could avoid lending Chu-na money. Second, even if she went to my parents afterward, they would finally have a legitimate reason to refuse her. That way, my mother's reputation remained intact, and the restaurant business wouldn't suffer. A perfect solution. What I did not expect, however, was that my younger cousin had secretly recorded the entire scene from beginning to end. From Liu Qiang storming into the cafe, to Chu-na refusing to help me and abandoning me without hesitation. Then she uploaded the video directly into the family group chat. Originally, I only wanted her to act as a witness. I never expected such an explosive result. Once that video spread, Chu-na's reputation would be utterly ruined. I opened the family group chat on my phone. Messages flooded the screen non-stop. "Vivi, are you okay? What happened? Did those people hurt you?" The chat was extremely lively, yet strangely, not a single person directly criticized Chu-na. Everyone clearly knew she was wrong, but adults often avoided openly exposing ugly truths in order to preserve relationships. Adults stayed silent. Children, however, did not. Standing beside me, my little cousin typed another message into the chat. Some people really have no shame at all. The bustling group chat instantly fell silent. Even Chu-na's parents, who had been pretending to care about me moments earlier, stopped talking entirely. I rubbed my little cousin's head gently and smiled. Well done. At that moment, I secretly decided that during Lunar New Year, I would definitely give her an enormous red envelope. After sending her home by taxi, I finally headed toward the restaurant where Liu Qiang and the others were waiting. The moment I reached the private dining room, however, my footsteps stopped abruptly. Inside the room sat a familiar figure, Lin Trock. One of the young men who had helped me perform at the cafe was currently laughing and chatting with him. "Seriously, this is the first time I've ever seen such a shameless woman," the young man said while shaking his head. The shameless woman he referred to was obviously Chu Na. Meanwhile, Lin Trock sat quietly listening, his expression becoming increasingly complicated. Over the past few days, my mother had repeatedly mentioned how deeply obsessed he still seemed with Chu Na. Even after being humiliated publicly, he continued trying to win her back. Standing outside the room, my heart suddenly tightened. Last time, Chu Na had already made him misunderstand me, believing I supported her idea of having a mixed-race child. Now he also knew I had staged today's entire performance to trick her. What if he exposed everything to please Chu Na? The possibility was extremely high. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. For the first time in my life, I truly felt annoyed by hopeless romantics. Out of all the people I hired, I never expected one of them would coincidentally know Lin Trock. And even more ridiculously, they happened to run into each other at the same restaurant. At this point, however, there was no point hiding anymore. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Lin Trock glanced at me quietly before immediately standing up to leave. "Wait," I called out instinctively. He paused. I forced a smile. "Since you're already here, why not stay and eat?" The dinner atmosphere turned unexpectedly awkward. Throughout the meal, I kept thinking about how to explain myself. Yet before I could speak, Lin Trock suddenly smiled faintly. "I noticed you looked nervous the entire evening," he said calmly. "Were you worried I'd expose your plan?" I froze slightly. Lin Trock lowered his eyes and gave a faint, tired smile. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "I know exactly what kind of person Chu Na is." He paused for a moment before continuing. "And honestly, you were right not to lend her money." I looked at him in surprise. For the first time, I finally asked the question that had bothered me for years. If you already knew what kind of person she was, then why did you still treat her so well all this time? She used your money to pay off a house under her own name. You must have known about all those little schemes. Lin Trock let out a long sigh. "I'm not stupid," he said softly. "Of course I knew." "Then why?" For a long while he remained silent. Only after several seconds did he finally speak again. "You've probably heard Chu Na say that I'm an orphan, right?" I nodded slowly. His gaze drifted somewhere far away, as though looking back into another lifetime. "When I was young," he began quietly, "I was bullied badly in school because I had no parents. During those years, almost everyone treated me like trash. They stole my food, locked me in bathrooms, beat me for fun." His voice remained calm, but the loneliness hidden beneath it made my chest tighten involuntarily. In all those years, Chu Na was the only person who ever helped me. She was the only one who stood in front of me even once. Even though he understood now that perhaps Chu Na had only acted on impulse back then, or maybe she had some completely selfish reason he never knew about. To a child drowning in endless darkness, even a tiny ray of light could become unforgettable. "I know it sounds ridiculous," Lin Trock said with a bitter smile. "But back then, that moment became the only warmth in my entire childhood." I fell silent. I had grown up in a loving family. I could never truly understand what it felt like to live through that kind of loneliness. But I could still imagine how deeply that single act of kindness had rooted itself inside his heart. Humans were complicated creatures. I had seen criminals capable of terrible violence still stop to help elderly strangers cross the street. One accidental good deed could never fully erase someone's ugliness. And one cruel personality did not erase every moment of kindness they once showed. Lin Trock suddenly laughed softly to himself. "I actually asked Chu Na once why she helped me back then." "And what did she say?" I asked quietly. "She forgot." His smile looked strangely empty. She genuinely couldn't remember anymore. The room became silent again. After a while, Lin Track slowly stood up from his seat.
I already bought a train ticket, he said.
Tomorrow, I'm leaving for another city. I probably won't come back here again. There was no anger in his voice anymore, only exhaustion. Perhaps 6 years of love had finally drained every last bit of strength from him. After leaving the restaurant, I checked the time. It was already close to 10 at night. 2 hours had passed since my younger cousin uploaded the video into the family group chat. Logically speaking, if my parents saw that video, they should have called me immediately. But my phone had remained completely silent. No missed calls. No messages. An uneasy feeling suddenly rose inside me. The moment I got out of the taxi, I rushed toward home as fast as I could. Before I even opened the door, I heard loud arguing from inside. The instant I stepped into the living room, I understood everything. I had still underestimated Chunya's shamelessness. While I was supposedly dealing with a life-threatening crisis, she had actually called my parents to borrow money. She knew that once they learned about my trouble, all their focus would shift toward helping me. At that point, they definitely would not lend her anything. So she wanted to seize the money before they found out. What a disgusting woman. I clenched my fists tightly. Fortunately, from the conversation, it sounded like she still had not succeeded. The moment I entered, I saw my mother furiously twisting my father's ear while forcing him down onto the sofa. "You idiot!" she shouted angrily. "How much money have you already lent that family over the years? Have they ever paid back even a single cent? And now you still want to lend Chuna more money. Is there something wrong with your brain?" My father could only cover his head helplessly. I was just thinking, her father helped me back then. "You still dare bring that up?" My mother exploded immediately. "It's been nearly 30 years. Are you planning to repay that so-called favor until the day you die?" I rubbed my forehead tiredly. Honestly, that favor from years ago was hardly worth mentioning at all. More than 20 years earlier, my father didn't yet have stable employment. At the time, Chuna's father worked as a low-level manager in a private company. The company happened to be hiring, so my parents brought gifts to their house and asked if he could help introduce my father. Chuna's father immediately acted troubled and claimed that connections were expensive. He demanded 3,000 yuan to arrange things. Back then, monthly salaries were only a few hundred yuan. My parents had to borrow money everywhere just to gather that amount. Yet later, after my father finally joined the company, another drunken manager casually revealed the truth. At that time, the factory was severely understaffed. Getting my father hired only required a single sentence. No money, no connections, nothing. Yet Chuna's family used that tiny incident to morally manipulate my parents for nearly 3 decades. Honestly, I sometimes suspected my father had an extreme people-pleasing personality. Otherwise, with how arrogantly Chuna's family behaved all these years, our family should have completely fallen out long ago. Seeing the chaos before me, I quickly interrupted. "Mom, Dad, something terrible happened." To completely prevent future problems, I decided to deceive even my parents this time. My mother immediately rushed toward me anxiously. "What happened, sweetheart? Are you hurt?" I calmly repeated the story I had prepared beforehand. The moment she finished listening, she hurriedly opened the family group chat and watched the video again. Her face turned pale instantly. She grabbed my shoulders and checked me over frantically. "Did they hit you anywhere? Are you injured?" I shook my head. Only then did she finally relax slightly. But when she saw my depressed expression, her eyes reddened immediately. Without hesitation, she pulled out a bank card and stuffed it into my hands. "Don't be scared," she said quickly. "There's more than 500,000 yuan in this card. Use it first. If it's not enough, Mom will find another way somehow." At that moment, I almost told them the truth. But after thinking carefully, I swallowed the words back down. Money was safer in my hands. My father was too soft-hearted. And despite how fiercely my mother opposed Chu Na now, deep down, she was still kind. If they discovered everything had only been an act, who knew whether my father might secretly lend Chu Na the money later anyway? I quietly decided that once enough time passed, I would eventually return the money to them properly. From then on, every once in a while, I deliberately sent Chu Na messages asking to borrow money. Naturally, she never replied even once. Still, I occasionally saw updates on her social media. Photos of foreign airports, luxury hotels, IVF clinics overseas. She proudly documented everything. I simply ignored it all. People like Chu Na were never capable of returning money anyway. And just like that, 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. After disappearing for more than a year, Chu Na suddenly contacted me again. She invited me to attend her son's first birthday celebration. I agreed immediately, and even brought my parents along. To be honest, I was curious too. After spending such an enormous amount of money to undergo overseas IVF, what kind of child had she actually given birth to? Perhaps because Chunya's family had offended too many people over the years, very few guests attended the banquet. The restaurant tables were barely half full. The moment I entered, I spotted the child in Chunya's arms immediately. A crowd had gathered around her. After all, mixed-race children were still relatively rare in our town, and everyone was curious. Surrounded by so much attention, Chuna's vanity was visibly overflowing. Her smile bloomed brightly like a chrysanthemum in full blossom. I stepped forward casually and glanced at the child. With my years of medical experience, I instantly sensed something was wrong. The baby's facial features were already fairly defined despite his young age, yet he looked nothing like the stunning mixed-race children Chu Na used to obsess over online. Judging from experience, the child would probably grow up looking fairly average. But appearance was the least important issue. What concerned me far more was the child's reaction. Several guests nearby were trying to amuse him, yet his responses were noticeably slow, as though his mind lagged behind by an entire beat. His eyes looked dull and unfocused. The signs of developmental problems were obvious. And in mixed-race genetic disorders, once one issue appeared, there was often more hidden beneath the surface. Of course, I was a doctor, not a machine. I couldn't determine every condition from a single glance. A proper examination would still be necessary. I looked at Chu Na calmly. When you have time later, you should bring him in for a full checkup. The smile on her face vanished instantly. What do you mean by that? I explained gently that the child might have certain developmental problems and should be examined early. Unexpectedly, Chu Na exploded immediately. My child is barely 1 year old, and you're already cursing him? Her face darkened furiously. Oh, I get it now. You're jealous because I gave birth to a mixed-race child with superior genes, so you're deliberately trying to slander him. I almost laughed from disbelief. This woman truly had no cure. If you insist on talking about bloodlines, I said coldly, then let's talk properly. Our country has thousands of years of history. If we're discussing noble ancestry, then which family sitting here today didn't once have ancestors who were officials, scholars, or nobles? The so-called superior bloodlines you worship so much. When our ancestors built civilizations and ruled kingdoms, theirs probably still lived in places nobody even remembers. So, what exactly gives them the right to look down on us? The atmosphere around the table changed immediately. Many guests had already been uncomfortable with Chu Na constantly glorifying foreign blood. They simply hadn't wanted to say it aloud. I continued calmly, and I advised you to get the child examined purely because of my professional ethics as a doctor. I noticed potential warning signs. I'm not like certain people who blindly worship foreigners while insulting their own roots. You're free to marry anyone you want. That's your personal freedom. But you were born and raised on this land, to grow up benefiting from your country, only to turn around and despise your own people. That's where you're wrong." The surrounding guests exchanged complicated glances. Nobody openly criticized Chu Na, but the suspicion in their eyes already made her visibly uncomfortable. Her expression shifted between green and pale white repeatedly. Halfway through the banquet, she finally glared at me hatefully. "You're just jealous," she snapped. "Mixed-race children can't possibly be as terrible as you claim." I no longer bothered arguing with her. For now, she could continue being stubborn. Reality would teach her soon enough. At the child's current age, many symptoms had not fully appeared yet. But as time passed, the problems would only become more obvious. And eventually, Chu Na would pay the price for her own obsession. Exactly as I predicted, less than half a year later, her entire family fell into panic. By 1.5 years old, normal children had already started learning to walk and speak. But Chu Na's superior mixed-race child still could not say a single word. Forget walking. He could barely even stand steadily. Terrified, Chu Na and her parents rushed the child to my hospital. "Please check him," Chu Na cried anxiously. "Why still can't he walk or talk?" Only half a year had passed, yet she already looked exhausted beyond recognition. Her parents had aged dramatically as well. Their hair had turned almost completely white. Children of the same age were already running around and calling for their mothers. Meanwhile, this child could do almost nothing. How could they possibly stay calm? I looked at Chu Na and gave a faint smile. Weren't mixed-race children supposed to have superior genes? How could there possibly be a problem? "Stop mocking me," she shouted immediately. "Even if my son has some small issues, he still carries excellent foreign blood." Even now she remained stubborn. I didn't bother arguing anymore. Sooner or later, reality would crush her fantasies completely. When the medical reports finally came back one by one, Chu Na's expression turned utterly bloodless. Having a mixed-race child was always a genetic gamble, and Chu Na clearly lacked the money necessary to carefully screen and select truly healthy donor genetics. The combination of already flawed genes triggered multiple inherited disorders simultaneously. Some conditions were relatively minor, though they would still follow the child for life. But the worst diagnosis was congenital heart disease. Combined with severe developmental delays, it explained why the child still couldn't walk properly at 1.5 years old. And beyond all that, there was also intellectual disability. The moment the diagnosis became clear, everyone understood. This child's future had essentially been destroyed before it even began. Chu Na stared blankly at the thick stack of medical reports in her trembling hands. Her lips shook violently. There must be a mistake. Unfortunately, there wasn't. Most of these illnesses could not be cured completely. They would require lifelong care and treatment. In a daze, Chu Na eventually carried the child out of the hospital without another word. Years passed quickly after that. I got married and eventually had a child of my own. Meanwhile, Chu Na's son grew older as well. I heard that in order to pay for his treatments, her family had sold their house and exhausted nearly all their savings. Eventually, they were forced to squeeze into a tiny rental apartment together. Once, by coincidence, I saw Chu Na picking her son up from school. The boy was already around 12 years old, yet his behavior remained drastically different from ordinary children. When he saw Chu Na approaching, he instinctively recoiled in resistance, as though he didn't even want to acknowledge her as his mother. Nearby, another parent sighed softly after recognizing them. "If things ended up like this," the woman muttered, "why insist on it back then? She ruined that child's entire life. If she wanted a mixed-race baby so badly, why didn't she ask doctors properly about the genetic risks first?" Chu Na, who was only around 40 years old by then, already had streaks of white hair spreading across her scalp. At first, she looked numb and lifeless. But the moment she heard those words, hatred suddenly ignited in her dull eyes again. "A doctor," she muttered blankly. Vi was a doctor. Why didn't she stop me back then? The very next day, Chu Na stormed into the hospital like a madwoman. The moment she saw me, she rushed forward and grabbed my collar violently. "Why?" she screamed hysterically. "Why did you support me back then? What exactly were you trying to do to me?"
Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair messy, and her entire body trembled uncontrollably. Years of exhaustion had hollowed her out completely. I pried her fingers off my clothes one by one and looked at her coldly. "I supported you?" I repeated slowly. "Or was it you who insisted on having a mixed-race child no matter what anyone said?" Chu Na froze. I continued calmly. "When you were still with Lin Trak, he warned you countless times about the risks, didn't he?" I refuse to believe that after hearing those warnings from the man who lived beside you for 6 years, you never once bothered to verify them yourself. Her face turned even paler. Deep down, she had always known. She simply chose not to care. "You understood everything from the very beginning," I said quietly. "You just ignored every danger because your vanity mattered more. You sacrificed your own child's future to satisfy your selfish obsession, and now you still have the nerve to come here and question me?" Every word struck her harder than a slap. "Everything that happened was the result of your own choices." "If I were you," I said coldly, "after destroying my child's entire life like this, I wouldn't even have the courage to keep living." The strength left Chu Na's body instantly. Her hands slowly dropped to her sides. For a moment, she looked like a puppet whose strings had been completely cut. Without another word, she turned around and walked away unsteadily. Her figure looked empty and lifeless. 1 month later, news spread that an unidentified female corpse had been found floating in the river. From that day onward, nobody ever heard from Chu Na again. Years later, I happened to see her son once more by coincidence. Time had passed quickly. The little boy had already grown into an adult. Unfortunately, his intellectual disability remained irreversible. Even with modern medicine, there was still no effective cure. Because of his condition, he never made it into high school. Chu Na's parents had also collapsed from years of emotional and financial pressure. Both eventually became bedridden. At such a young age, the boy was forced to work to support himself. When I saw him again, he was carrying dishes inside a small restaurant. His clothes were old, his movements were clumsy. Life had clearly not treated him kindly. Watching him struggle silently through work, I could not help sighing softly. In truth, the acute illness that killed me in my previous life had nothing to do with fate. It was caused by years of overwork. Being a doctor meant endless overtime shifts, irregular meals, and constant exhaustion. I had ignored my physical health for far too long. After being reborn, I changed all those bad habits completely. Naturally, my body no longer developed serious problems. As for the child, he was never at fault. Children never get to choose whether they are born. The real tragedy was that Chu Na's obsession with having a superior mixed-race child had already rooted itself deeply inside her mind long before any of this happened. Even in my previous life, when she stayed with Lin Trak and gave birth to his child instead, things had not turned out well. Lin Trak was constantly busy with work and rarely had time to care for the child. Meanwhile, Chu Na hated the child for being ordinary and constantly complained that his genes were inferior. The child grew up without affection from either parent. Before my death in my previous life, that child had already developed severe depression at a very young age. Although I never witnessed the ending personally, anyone who truly understood depression already knew what kind of future awaited that child. Parents' beliefs and obsessions often shape an entire child's life, and sometimes they destroy it completely. Years after everything had ended, I occasionally still thought about Chu Na. Not because I missed her, but because every time I saw exhausted parents dragging their children through hospital hallways, I would inevitably remember that little boy with the dull eyes and slow reactions.
In another life, perhaps he could have grown up happily too. Perhaps he would have run freely across school fields, argued with classmates, complained about homework, and secretly fallen in love with someone someday. But before he was even born, his fate had already been burdened by his mother's obsession. Some people spend their entire lives chasing vanity, only to discover too late that children are not trophies created to satisfy parental pride. They are human beings, and human lives should never become gambling chips for selfish desires. One winter afternoon, after finishing work, I passed by the restaurant where Chuna's son worked again. The weather was freezing. Snow drifted slowly through the air, while pedestrians hurried past with scarves wrapped tightly around their necks. Inside the restaurant, the young man moved clumsily between tables carrying heavy trays. His reactions were slower than ordinary people's, and now and then customers showed impatient expressions toward him. Yet he still bowed apologetically every single time. There was no resentment in his eyes, only exhaustion. At some point, he accidentally dropped a bowl onto the floor. The sharp sound of shattering porcelain startled the entire restaurant. The manager immediately stormed over. "What's wrong with you? Can't you even handle something this simple?" The young man lowered his head quickly and kept apologizing over and over. I'm sorry. His voice sounded awkward and slow, almost childlike despite his adult appearance. Seeing that scene, my chest tightened slightly. Not because I pitied Chuna, but because I pitied him. A child born into this world without ever being asked whether he wanted to come. A child forced to carry the consequences of another person's vanity for his entire life. After work ended, he stepped outside alone carrying a worn backpack. Snowflakes landed softly on his hair. For a brief moment, he looked up at the night sky quietly. Then he smiled. It was a very small smile, simple, pure, almost innocent. And strangely enough, that expression reminded me a little of Lynn Track. Perhaps kindness really could survive through blood after all. I stood beneath the streetlight, watching silently for a long time before finally turning away. Some wounds never truly disappear. Some tragedies never fully leave your memory. But life still moves forward regardless. This second chance at life taught me many things. Hatred could destroy people, vanity could destroy families, and the beliefs parents force onto their children could quietly ruin entire futures. Back in my previous life, when I died helplessly on the floor while Chuna hid my phone and watched coldly from the side, I had once believed revenge was the only thing worth pursuing after rebirth. But after everything ended, I realized something else. The greatest revenge was never personally ruining someone. It was simply allowing them to face the consequences of their own choices. Chuna destroyed herself long before anyone else did. In the end, she was consumed completely by the very obsession she worshipped most. As for me, I no longer worked endless overtime like before. I learned to rest, to eat properly, to spend time with my family. Sometimes on weekends, I would bring my child to the park and watch him laugh while chasing pigeons across the square. Ordinary, healthy, alive. That alone already felt more precious than anything else in the world. Because after dying once, I finally understood something very clearly. There is no such thing as a perfect bloodline, no superior race, no child born destined to stand above others. The only thing that truly shapes a child's future is the love, responsibility, and values given by the people raising them.